I'm turning it on. All right, we are live now. Let's see. One sec. All right. So we are live, Alex. Got a couple minutes before game time, but figured it better to check. I'm going to just make sure that looks like Vic is watching us on YouTube. I can see that popped up in the top left. I don't know if you see that too, Alex. There's a counter. It says live, and then it's got like an eyeball. Maybe you don't see that as a co-presenter.
Yeah.
All right. So
are we supposed to be starting, or did we say we're waiting until Vic tells us to begin?
I'm just going to wait till she pings me. Let's see. Yep, we're good. She just confirmed. All right. So we're live. Let's see. Yeah, we're good. We got some folks jumping on. So Alex, what are we going to talk about today in our office hours? Because these are busy times.
Very, very busy. Yes. Wharton released its interview invites towards the end of last week, and it looks like Sloan is releasing its interview invites today, as we predicted on the podcast last week that they would do it this week. Well, it's not a very difficult prediction since they're the second last out of the gate. Cornell Johnson have also got to roll out their invites this week too, a little bit later this week, I suppose. But yeah, so it's all about interview prep, interviewing, potential round 2 strategy. Some folks getting decisions if they're early action applicants. So that's coming through too. So yeah, quite a lot going on. And we could also talk about the H-1B visa issue that we've obviously been keeping a close eye on for our international candidates. And I know you recently recorded a video on that topic, and we talked about that in some detail on our podcast last week. But yeah, lots going on, Graham.
Yeah, I was really happy about the H-1B stuff, just because if anything, it favors the MBA as a means to kind of coming to the US. Yeah, so very, very good news there. And yeah, as you say, this is crazy, interview season. I think even for schools that we didn't mention, like HBS, I mean, we're in the thick of interview, season right now. So it's busy. And I will say, we did get our hands on the Wharton team-based discussion prompt, just like literally just prior to this call or this live stream. So we can always sort of talk about that. Although I want to just admit to everyone.
But I'm going to address Claire's question because
there we go. All right.
This did wrinkle me a little bit, because I'm all about consistency and reliability. And that means we said every 4th Tuesday.
I know.
And for whatever reason, this month we moved it to Monday. There were some scheduling conflicts, Claire. We will move back to that 4th Tuesday of the month, but we need to be a bit smarter about making sure the schedule is clean and clear for that day. But there will not be a live stream tomorrow, to answer your question, Claire. But yeah, very good point.
Yeah. And in the interest of transparency, the reason there isn't is we have an event we're running at the same time with, I can't remember which region it is, but there are 5 business schools we're doing a live webinar with admissions directors and stuff. And that was scheduled long before we started this whole live stream stuff. So that's why we ran into that conflict. But anyway, so yeah, Claire, thanks for coming back. As always, if you have questions, just post them into the stream here and we will address them. But Alex, do you want to talk a little bit about, interviewing or Wharton or anything in particular as we kind of get started here and wait for some questions and things?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Wharton interview is very different to others. So I'll just talk about the other interviews to begin with. And then if we have specific questions about Wharton, we can certainly address those. But when you're interviewing at one of these top programs, it could be a blind interview, it could be a resume-based interview, it could be based off your application materials. I mean, different schools have different approaches. And obviously, when you go to interview, you should know, if you're interviewing with HBS, that they have read your essays and might have follow-up questions, et cetera, And if you're interviewing, I think it's with Darden, they haven't even looked at your resume. And so forth. The interviewer, not the admissions folks, because they've already made a decision to interview you. So obviously they've read your stuff. But my broader point is, regardless of the interview approach. Preparation, I wouldn't say needs to vary that much, Graham, because I think when you're preparing to interview, the best way to prepare is to know your application. I would, the night before any interview that I had, I'd reread my essays and my data forms and just make sure I'm in that mental mindset of going into the interview. And I think, frankly, that's the best way for that preparation. And then Graham would add to that, find someone to prep with, right? Have some simulated experience and so forth. And actually, not to get ahead of ourselves, but we are in development for a tool that will help you with that. It's not quite ready yet, so no good for round one, folks. But try to find someone that's prepared to ask you some of these questions. And how might you find these questions? Would be, you could go to our interview archive. That's a very popular tool. You could also use our chatbot, and you could upload your MBA resume and just prompt the chatbot what school you're interviewing with and ask it to come up with 10 questions. And it can do that. And it's quite clever at doing that, quite honestly. So lots of potential opportunity to interview. But we have a question from Andrea, so I'll stop rabbiting on. And it says, hello, Graham and Alex. I'm interviewing with HBS. Well, that is absolutely fantastic. So even without reading further, HBS out of all the schools takes the deepest cut in terms of who they select to interview, or at least that's been our experience over the years, unless they changed it this season, which I doubt it. So to get that interview invite to HBS is absolutely fantastic. Wanted to know if you have any specific advice for this type of interview. So whilst I've rattled on a little bit, Graham, I'll let you lead off on this.
Yeah, the HBS interviews a really interesting experience just because they've read your file. In fact, I remember having a conversation with the director of admissions where, it was brought up that it's not just they've read the file. This was back, I guess it was the person before the current director who said, he said it was Chad Losey, who used to be director. He said he sits down and spends like 45 minutes, like really reading the file again before the interview. So they're really highly tuned in to who you are and what you've said. And what that means is they're kind of expecting you to go one layer deeper in the interview, and they will ask you questions specifically down that path, right? So they'll literally come up with, oh, you talked about this team experience in your essay, or you told us this in, here or there. Tell me more about that experience. Who was on the team? What were you thinking? What did you say? What did you do? This typical kind of behavioral, what we call peeling of the onion, as they go layer by layer to really get at what was going on. And the only other thing I would say about it, so as Alex says, prepare, like know your file inside and out, and know what you could talk about beyond the file, like that takes those stories and adds even more dimension to them. Sometimes you'll talk about other things too that are even, that not in your file. Like they might ask you for a different example or an additional example of something, but so you need to be ready. It's a little different than a very high level resume based interview. The only other thing I'll say about HBS, and I mean, they don't say this. I feel like they almost will deny it when asked, but I feel like their interview style it's very neutral. Like this isn't a, hey, bravo, you've made it this far, you're awesome. It's not a celebration of how great you are in the way that you might find at some schools where you get an interview invitation. It's pretty deadpan. Like it's sort of like, we have these questions for you. We want to know more. It's kind of a fact-finding mission. And so that can be intimidating. I mean, I actually interviewed at HBS back when I applied, and I got in there, but I remember walking out of that interview feeling like I called my wife and I said, there's no way that I'm getting in there. So let's plan to go to Philly. Cause I had already been, accepted at Wharton, but I feel like you just, you kind of come out of that experience with being a little worried because of the probing nature of the questions. You just feel like, wow, they keep peeling back the onion. They must not like what they're hearing, or they want more evidence or something. So it can be a little disorienting. And I think the key is to just maintain your cool, know that it's not personal, and just answer the questions that they're asking. I'll stop rambling, but Alex, I mean, is that a fair, we've talked about this a lot over the years, but.
And you didn't mention the outcome of your interview, Graham?
No, I said I got in. Yeah. But I really felt like I wasn't, because like it was for everything that I shared, it
Yeah,
felt like, there was this sort of questioning afterwards that made me wonder if they weren't satisfied with the answers that
yeah,
I'd given. Right. So
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
little challenging.
yeah,
And there was even, yeah. So anyway, so I would say, Andrea, look in the interview archive. You'll get a real sense of the types of questions they like to ask. As Alex said, you could upload your resume or even your essays into the Ask Clear Admit bot on our site, this is all free. I mean, just upload it and ask it to come up with questions for you, because the bot does know what kinds of questions HBS likes to ask. And it could probably give you some good, ideas. And yeah, from there, just practice though. You really have to hear yourself giving these
yeah,
answers to get good at it.
yeah, yeah. And what about the follow-up, Graham? Because I think HBS is different on a couple of different levels, right? On the one hand, it does have
Oh
this
yeah.
more deep dive into niche aspects of your application, and will ask follow-up questions, etc., etc. But then it'll also ask you to write a memo post-interview, sort of providing the interview experience and anything to follow up with.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love this. And I remember when they first introduced this, I asked the head of admissions, like, where's this coming from? And there were a couple of things. They were like, look, we want to get a kind of quick snapshot at how someone thinks, and get their take on the experience they had with us. And we only give them 24 hours because this is like you've just gone to a big meeting, you've made your pitch, and you got to follow up with the client right away. It sort of mimics the business world. You're not going to
Yeah,
wait 5 weeks, polish it, have 10 people, read it. Get us something about how you felt, how this went, anything else you wanted to share that you couldn't get across, and be done with it. So I think, frankly, some of it was designed, even this pre-AI era, it was designed to kind of just try to get at the authentic, raw, response from the candidate. It's even more relevant today, I would say. But yeah, that's what they're going for. They want to know what kind of experience you had. And I will say they did make room for the fact that they know not every interview is great. And so this is a little bit of a chance for you to kind of position how it went, and what you thought, or things that you weren't able to kind of convey that you really wanted to. But
yeah.
it is unusual. I mean, they're one of the few schools that have any kind of exercise post interview.
If you don't have a good interview with HBS, Graham, can you get admitted?
I mean, I think so, but it's true that, so one of the benefits of them making a really steep cut in terms of who they invite is that the people they do invite have a really good chance of getting in, right? We've estimated at it probably around half, or maybe even a little better sometimes, right? So that's much better than your odds post interview at, say, Booth or Wharton, which are probably more like a third, I think. So that's the good news. The bad news is I think they are basing a lot of this decision around the interview. I mean, they're taking a deep dive into your candidacy, and so I think it's probably a heavier data point than it might be with some of these other schools too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. But I guess the broader point I'm trying to make is, and across other schools, the interview doesn't become the only metric in terms of whether you're admitted or not. You could be
Right.
going to the HBS interview because you have an outstanding profile. So maybe, they invited, let's say, a quarter of their applicant pool to interview, and you might sit at the very top 1% of that quarter. And if you have a poor interview because basically you were overly nervous or whatever, I mean, that might drop you a little bit, but it's not necessarily going to completely eliminate you. When they review, as all schools do, make that review post interview to make the final decision, they're going to take into context the interview with everything else. It's not
Yes.
only interview that determines outcome. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that out there because sometimes that's a little bit
And
misunderstood. Yeah.
and let's tackle Claire's question, but just one last
Mm.
thing. Mechanically speaking, even at HBS, where you could argue the interview is really important, there's still, after they make notes on the interview, those notes go into your file, and your file goes back to the committee for a full read and discussion in most cases, right? So it's, yeah, as you say, it's not like the interview is the last hurdle, and if you get a green light on the interview, you're in. It's got to still go back through the regular process, because most schools, as we know, they read the file a couple of times to determine interview, and then they read it again post interview to
Yeah.
determine whether you're in or not. So yeah, so that's for sure.
Yeah. You're going to have to up the questions onto the
There we
thing
go.
because I
Yep.
don't have that privilege.
All right. So we
Unlike,
have a question from Claire that you can read to us, maybe.
yeah. So for the Wharton TBD, team-based discussion, um, I've heard conflicting info about the 10-minute one-on-one post-TBD. So with the TBD, you're going to be put into a group of 5, something like that, to discuss a proposal. Each of you come with a different proposal. You'll discuss it, and we can get into more detail about that a little bit later if that's what folks want to talk about. But the post-TBD, each person has a one-on-one with one of the Wharton interviewers. Some say it's what did you think of the discussion? So provide feedback. Others say it's why Wharton, why MBA, why now, that sort of thing. Or is it a mix? Graham? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So it's a mix in my experience. The first question is typically, what did you think of that? And you can share they want to get your gauge on how it went and what you thought of the interactions. And that gives you a chance. I think in some regards, if you had like a loudmouth on the team and you couldn't get, a word in edgewise or something, it gives you a chance to kind of, just sort of show them what you perceived to be happening in the conversation. You don't want to throw anyone under the bus, of course, but you can diplomatically sort of share your view. But then quickly it pivots into, hey, why do you want an MBA? Why are you interested in Wharton? But these are really short. It's like 10 minutes. So it's not exactly like a traditional interview. I mean, I know a lot of candidates wish that they had the sort of 20 or 30 minutes to sort of have that discussion, but Wharton has put the emphasis on the team discussion. So this is really, in fact, I don't think they did this in the first year, and they ended up introducing it to, kind of make sure that every candidate felt like they had at least a little bit of solo time with an admissions rep. So that's how it is. But yeah, you got to be ready for both, an assessment of what the team-based discussion was like and answering some basic questions about why Wharton, why MBA, career goals, and in some cases, any questions you might have, for the student who's going to be interviewing you.
I think the point being, just expect both lines of inquiry. You might only get one or the other or both, but be prepared for both. And you should be prepared for the why Wharton, because that's all been part of your admissions profile, so that should be fine. And as Graham says, just don't throw anyone under the bus. Be diplomatic in terms of your experience. I mean, the folks that are asking these questions, they've just observed what happened, so they're Wharton students. They kind of know how things work. So
and I think there's a lot we could say about team-based discussion. So we'll maybe come back to it. But yeah, it's definitely, it's a different preparation process. And yeah, we recorded, there's a podcast that we did about it. We'll probably do a podcast maybe this week, Alex, and talk all about the Wharton TBD. But do you want to tackle our next question, which is a question that we received from Ananya? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but the questions is what are the odds of getting in at Johnson, right? Is that what, that's what it says. With a waiver and a 3.3 GPA, econ undergrad with 3 years of experience. Alex, I want you to what do you think of this one?
I mean, this is tricky because obviously when you just see a few data points, you can't really compute odds because there's a big story behind these data points that are going to be really, really important. So 3 years of experience showing impact and growth, supported by really strong recommendations, that would be very important, and so forth. What are they doing outside of work? So that can add another layer to their overall profile that's super interesting, and so forth. A 3.3 GPA probably isn't outstanding, but again, it would depend on the university itself, a little bit of grade inflation or something like that. So with that said, I'd be a little bit queasy about the test waiver, because obviously taking the test would allow a candidate to demonstrate that some acuity for the quant stuff more recently and so forth. So if they're targeting round 2, I might go back and rethink that test waiver strategy and possibly explore the option of taking tests. But I don't know why they've waived the test and on what basis, what grounds. Maybe there's some really good reason for that. You'll note that most top programs don't yet allow for test waves. I know I think Johnson does, and a few of them do, but most of them towards the very top end still require some test, although it could be a variety of different types of tests. But I guess my broader point is we can't compute odds just based off
Right.
of data points.
But I will say, to give this person who's joined us a kind of little window into how an admissions officer's mind works. I mean, Alex has touched on many of the things. It's like when I look at that, I say, okay, 3.3 in econ. Well, where did they go to school? Is this University of Chicago with one of the best economics departments in the world? Or is it, JPIP State, a school I've never heard of, and also, how did they do in the quantitative coursework on the transcript? Is this 4.0 in all the econ courses and then some mediocre grades in less relevant subjects in terms of their, business school trajectory? But also, I mean, at the end of the day, like, I like a test score if I'm an admissions officer because it gives me another data point. As Alex says, it's a recent data point, and it helps me to kind of, even things out. And I would say 3.3 is below average. So I'd want to see a test score that's above average to balance that out. So again, we can't give odds, but I would never recommend someone to apply with a 3.3 and no test if they're really wanting to get in and have time to take the test, which, presumably we're looking at round 2 at this point in January. So someone could spend the fall prepping and taking that test.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the answer to the question is we need more context, and so on and so forth. So Graham, we talked at the top of the hour, and obviously we could wait for more questions to come in. You mentioned that this is really good news for students, the current H-1B visa situation. Can you just expand as to why we currently think that?
Yeah, I mean, the basic thing is that it's saying that if you're already in the United States and you're trying to get an H-1B visa, that you don't have to pay, your employer doesn't have to pay the $100,000 fee. And most MBA grads from top programs in the States would be in the US because they would have started work after business school in the States on their, 3-year STEM OPT visa. That's kind of an automatic with the MBA. And then in year 2 or 3 of that, they might, be applying, or their employer would be applying for the H-1B, and there's no fee. This person's already in the States. So to me, it's really appealing. And if anything, it probably disadvantages the people who are saying, oh, I want to be in the US, but I'll get my MBA locally in my country. And then eventually I'll try to go over to the States on an H-1B. That's going to be a much harder path. So the MBA, if anything, maybe is a better window into that sort of permanent residency pathway in the States. So I think it's good news, much better news than we originally thought. So yeah, I was really happy to see that. And it's good news for the Americans who want to go to business school too, because I think it means, you'll have a more diverse student body. I still remember my days in class at Wharton. I mean, it was like a UN, you look around the room, there are people from, China, Russia, Taiwan, Israel, I mean, every country, it's just really impressive. And people have different points of views and different ways of operating. And you learn a lot when you're put on a learning team with some of these individuals. So yeah, so I think it's good news.
Do you remember Georgie?
I do. Yeah. George from Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how we always remembered. Yeah. So yeah, he was at Wharton, and I don't know, he's some sort of Bitcoin magnate now, right? I don't know, but
I think it's today or tomorrow he's publishing a book.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
that just reminded me. I mean, there's a really interesting character at Wharton. You got 800 students, but every one of those 800 students in that year knew Georgie, right?
Yes.
Georgie from Georgia, and but he bet big on the Bitcoin thing many years ago. And I saw recently that he's publishing a book about that whole story, which I will be buying very shortly, because I really need to understand this world a lot better. But I only bring that up because, one, he was a great character, but secondly, he's a really good example of the richness that international students bring to these top tier programs. That you end up engaging and interacting with people from really different backgrounds, really different life experiences, and points of view, but all super intelligent, right? So you've got the beauty of all this diversity, but it's a really high caliber because they've all got admitted to a top business school.
And thinking back to that, you know, in my cohort alone at Wharton, you know, I was with George from Georgia,
Yeah,
the country, not where Atlanta
yeah,
is, but the country.
yeah.
But I also had a guy named Alex Ricard, who was a French
Mm,
guy in my cohort, whose last name Ricard may be famous to people because he was part of that family that makes pastis and all these famous liquors in France, and now is part of Seagram's or whatever. But anyway, yeah, just I mean, it really impressive, and obviously the Americans in the group were terrific too. But it is, yeah, there's a
yeah.
value in having that kind of international and, you know, sort of geographic and industry diversity. So, oh, hold on, we got another question that just popped in. Thank you, Mira, for asking a question and keeping this flowing. Alex, you want to talk us through this one?
Yeah, I mean, Mira, so the question is, I have an interview with Hass, any advice? I guess my first query back to you, Mira, is it going to be a live interview or a day interview by like an interview bot too, right? Don't they, Graham? They have a pre-recorded sort of set of interview questions as a way to manage their overall interview flow.
Yeah, like an asynchronous, right?
Yeah,
Or whatever you call
yeah.
that.
Yeah. So
Okay, so
in
it's live.
Mira's case, it's live. But I guess I should answer that first question. Regardless of the format of the interview, the preparation should be the same. I mean, it's not like in the video interview process, they would deliberately ask different types of questions and deliberately interpret them differently and so forth. All business schools want to level the playing field regardless of how you interview. So some schools might use different types of interviewers, like student interviewers, alum interviewers, and AdCom interviewers, but they spend a lot of time, effort, and energy just making sure, regardless of who you interview with, um, the playing field is the same, and it's also where you interview is a similar um, idea, whether you interview on campus or interview at a local interview hub or online via Zoom, which is, I assume, much more popular now. The playing field should be the same. So with Hass, I would say there's nothing extraordinary about this type of interview. So I think it's basically a resume-based type interview. I would go check our interview archive, and I think Graham has
Yeah, I
put
just popped a link in there to that. Yeah.
the link in there to take you to the interview archive. And I would just look at the 10 most recent reports or whatever, just to get a feel of the types of questions that they ask. I would go to our chatbot and put in you can upload a PDF to the chatbot. And Graham, if you could put the link to the chatbot into the chat, that would
Yeah,
be
I'll do that
cool.
too. Yeah.
You can upload your resume, and then in the prompt, just say, I have an interview at Hask. Can you please provide me 10 questions to prep for? And then you could ask it, can you please give me some bulleted points on the best way to respond to those questions, right? Because again, it's reading off of your resume, so it knows what you've done and can personalize that feedback and that guidance and so on and so forth. But I would say just interviewing at any of these top schools, just really come prepared. And the best way to prepare is really know your application, right? So your essays, your data forms, your why MBA, your why now, your why Hass is going to be really, really important. But I would say that for any school. So the why Hass, make a really strong case for that, and so forth. So presumably you want to be on the West Coast post MBA, and making sure it's an industry that Hass does particularly well in, and so on and so forth. And then, you know, prepare well, but then go and hopefully enjoy the interview experience. Be a little bit nervous. If you're not a little bit nervous, you'll be flat. So don't worry about being a little bit nervous. It can really help you, I think, interview. And as Graham will say, try to find someone to prep some of these interview questions to you, and have a sort of a live sort of back and forth with someone that's probably knows a little bit about your background, maybe knows a bit about the industries and so on and so forth. So probably not your mother and so forth, but yeah, find someone to prep with.
Yeah, I would say one thing that's nice about Haas is that so yes, sometimes if there are no interview slots, they force you to do this like asynchronous thing where you go on and the computer asks you a question, you record your answer, and that I think that's hard because it's hard to be really energetic in front of a robot that's not, but most of the interviews will be via Zoom or in person. And, they often use second year students. And everyone, if you look in the interview archive, you'll see people are reporting that, it's a pretty casual discussion. They do talk about how it's quite focused at the beginning. Because it sounds like the interviewers need to get across these key questions like why MBA, why now, what's your career, why, as Alex said, why Haas. There do seem to be some questions about what are you going to be contributing to Haas? Like, what are you bringing to the table? And also some of those tell me about a time when, type questions as well, which we could consider be more behavioral in nature. But in any event, the nice thing is most people report that after those kind of questions are out of the way, there's this bit that they seem to be reserving about 10 minutes for at the end that's much more conversational and just sort of, getting to know you, asking you, maybe telling you a little bit about the Haas community. So most people leave with a pretty positive experience. But as Alex says, you got to spend the time getting ready. And this advice really, as you point out, Alex, it applies to so many of the schools out there that interview.
I would say
There's nothing.
80% of
Yeah.
schools prep the
Yeah,
same way.
exactly.
Now,
Yeah.
Graham brings up a good point. So Haas is going to spend a little bit of that interview selling Haas to you, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Harvard isn't. Harvard and Stanford stand at the very top of the heap, right? So their yields are going to be very high, et cetera, et cetera. And they literally can select the cream of the crop and just expect if they admit someone, there's a quite high likelihood they're going to want to come. Whereas Haas, which is an outstanding program, I would put it in that tier set 8 to 10, right, with Yale and Tuck, right, just outside the M7. So it's competing. In your case, it might be with Stanford if you're wanting to be in on the West Coast. Maybe it's Kellogg or whatever it might be. They know that you probably didn't just apply to Haas. So a little bit of the interview might be a bit of a sell on their part. So just bear that in mind. But yeah, I think 80% of these schools you prepare similarly, but the why this school has got to be really well thought out.
Yeah. And one thing I will say in these types of interviews where you're going to get a lot of these classic questions, why MBA? Why now? What are your career plans exactly? Why our school? Tell me about yourself. Like these general questions that you got to know. We have an admissions tip called the 5 most common questions and how to ace them somewhere on our website. But I think one of the keys with those questions is you want to have answers that are structured and, that that you're ready for, but you also want to make sure that you're still having a conversation with the interviewer. Because
Yeah,
sometimes you can go and you have this like response you want to give, and then suddenly it's sort of robotic and you're not actually meshing with the person. So, they will probe and go further. So it's sort of you have to read the room kind of thing, and answer the question, but allow them to then say, oh, tell me a little bit more about that. Or, so I just want to people to know that because sometimes, the time slot goes by very quickly. And you don't want to just be rattling on and not get to the other stuff and, being able to kind of talk a little bit about Haas, et cetera. So,
yeah, yeah. And congratulations on getting the interview and also hearing about the interview already, because Haas is one of those notorious for trickling out interview invites until early December, quite frankly. I think maybe
yeah.
late November anyway. So having the interview already in the bag, I think is I don't know if it's necessarily a positive signal relative to all others that have interview invites, but certainly
It's more
helps
comforting.
you, yeah, helps you move on a bit more expeditiously. So
Yeah.
that's very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. All these schools do it a little bit differently, but there is a theory that sometimes earlier interview invitations, all things being equal, might be a sign that your file was a kind of a clear, not a clear admit, but a clear, like, let's have this person to interview. And the only reason I say that is because the way that at Wharton, when we were in admissions, often the way that things would work is you have a first reader who reads the file, makes notes on it, and indicates like, oh, let's invite this person to interview. And then you have a second reader. Same thing. They read the comments from the first, they develop their own point of view, and they also put an opinion And if their opinion is don't invite this person to interview, then it goes to a third round of reading. And that's where I think sometimes you could see a delay in those schools that are not issuing all invites on the same date. They're letting them trickle out. Well, clearly, if your file needs an extra read, there's a few more days in the system, maybe even a week, that could lead to a little bit of a delay. So that's the theory, why sometimes people say this. Now, there are schools that just do it differently. Some schools issue all the invites on the same date, or, some of the schools that we see issuing very early invitations are doing a kind of screening based on just some very top line numbers. So that could be different too. But even there,
Yeah.
yeah,
And Haas doesn't fall into either of those buckets.
no, they
No.
just trickle
No.
them out. And
Yeah.
the other thing I have to be careful of is there are always these theories on Reddit, like, oh, they read all the applications from Japan. They're all read by the same person and in the same week. And if you didn't get an invite for Japan, then you're done. And it really is quite rare for a team to read by region. I mean, it varies school to school, and there are still some that do it, but even still, I would be very cautious about making some of these conclusions. People all come up with all kinds of, oh, they read all the consultants or all the PE people, or, I mean, it doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
I mean, they have large teams, and, people travel to go do recruiting. And so they can't read files for a week. So they fall behind. There's all kinds of things that can happen along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
very good. So Graham, I'm going to put you on the spot because we're waiting for other
Yeah, we don't have any questions right now.
So
All right.
if folks could put questions in, that'd be great. But in the meantime, Graham, let's imagine you're in Claire's shoes and you have a Wharton interview invite, and you're thinking long and hard about this idea that you're going to bring to the table for the TBD. If it's not selected, can you get admitted?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So just as background, Wharton asked everyone to do a little exercise before they come to the team-based discussion, which is, in this case, come up with a leadership program, or they have these leadership ventures. You go away for 48 hours. And so they ask you to come up with your own, an idea for one. You bring it in. And Alex is saying, well, what if your idea doesn't get selected? Because the group has to kind of arrive at a single idea, that you have like 20 minutes to kind of work together, hear each other's ideas, and then refine or combine into a single idea. And that's really challenging. I think you can absolutely get accepted without your idea being chosen. In fact, we've heard that often more than one person gets in from the group. And in fact, there's some evidence that groups tend to move on together, almost like if a group has a really good discussion and everyone's involved, that whole group might get an acceptance. It's not, there's no sort of like, they're not saying, oh, we're only going to take one out of every 5 people, i.e. one from each group that we interview or something. It doesn't work that way at all. The key is to use the time to build, like if your idea is not the one picked, just pivot right off of it and start helping to refine or enhance the idea that did get chosen. Show that you can collaborate and that there's no ego. So I think that's definitely my advice is, be ready to pivot. It doesn't mean anything if your idea is not chosen. I mean, I think you need, if anything, it could give you a real chance to shine and as you kind of pivot off of your idea and into someone else's.
And what sort of folks get eliminated from the TBD stage? What are the obvious things to avoid?
I mean, I think, not allowing space for others to participate would be a huge red flag, right? I mean, just talking the entire time. I also think to some extent, if you don't say anything, you're not going to do very well either, right? I mean, I think you want to, everyone has to come in with their idea, and the way that the team-based discussion starts is that everyone has to present their idea. And so you've got to be articulate and ready to sort of deliver your little elevator pitch. But I think, any kind of being rude, not letting someone talk, interrupting, basic, things that everyone should know, but surprisingly, sometimes, people forget in these discussions.
And I only bring this up because we do have a couple of podcast episodes that you can probably find quite easily with a search on our site, focus on the TBD. They're not currently yet focused on this current question for the leadership initiatives, but all the commentary that we provide in those podcasts are absolutely applicable, regardless of the prompt, is my point. So I would really encourage folks to look for those, if like Claire or whatever, if they're interviewing with Wharton. In the meantime, I think we're going to plan to do a podcast. Claire,
Yeah,
can
we'll talk
you?
about it.
I don't know if Claire can, but it'd be quite interesting to know what the interview schedules are when folks are starting to interview. I assume it's going to be quite soon, and
Yeah,
it's
I
all
believe so.
all over Zoom, I presume, as it was last season. I think, right?
It is. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And Claire asked us another question here, though. You can
Yeah.
see, she's obviously prepping for the TBD, but she wants to know which schools have
Yeah.
the largest interview cuts or highest
Yeah.
post-interview odds among
Yeah.
these. Oh,
So this is interesting, Claire, right? So not to interrupt you, I obviously wouldn't do well in a TBD, Graham, so I just cut you off just like that. But I like this question because there is no odds post-interview that you can generalize across all those that interviewed. Back to my point, when you're invited to interview, you might be at the top of the heap, or you might have been the last person selected effectively at the bottom of the heap to get the interview, right? So if you're at the top of the heap, your odds are going to be a lot stronger than if you were just scraped over the hurdle to get the interview invite, right? So I mean, I'm not saying anything that isn't just logical, right? My point being, in your case, Claire, if you got an interview invite at Wharton, then I would imagine, not to dismiss a couple of these schools on your list, but let's say at Stern and Johnson, which are a couple of tiers lower, you would be quite close to the top of the heap of those interviewing at Johnson or Stern or whatever it might be. So therefore, I think your odds would be pretty good. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't then prepare and do your best, etc., etc. But the odds of a Wharton interviewee who's interviewing at a school a couple of tiers lower has to be higher than the odds of someone that, let's say, is interviewing at a top 20 program, but also has an interview invite at Johnson, right? So bear that in mind. I mean, Graham, you could come up with some generalized odds, I'm sure, because you helped come up with the data points for the interview guides, but that would be my bigger point.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these schools are quite similar. So, but then there are others. So, for example, MIT does a pretty steep cut, almost like Harvard does, where they're interviewing people that they're pretty certain have what it takes and they're very interested in. There are other schools more at the opposite end of the spectrum, whether that's a Tuck or UVA, where they try to interview a lot of people. They want you to get to know their culture, and so you could argue that the post-interview odds at a place like MIT, or as we said earlier, Harvard, are probably greater in terms of acceptance because they're just taking a bigger group because they already made a steep cut to get to that phase. Whereas the Yales, Columbias, what else, Stern, and maybe Johnson to some extent are probably more similar post. But as Alex points out, it really depends on your candidacy. And if you're getting interviews at Wharton, yeah, chances are you're a very strong candidate for some of these other schools that are maybe a bit lower ranking. But yeah, so that's my take on that.
But it behooves you to do really, really well anyway, because then scholarship dollars factor.
Yes.
So it's not just about getting in or not, but then, all right, what discount can I get through scholarships and so forth? I'll just add, Claire, or whatever, the Wharton TBDs in the next couple of weeks. So I would assume our podcast that we're recording this week will be dedicated to TBDs.
Yeah, so that'll air Monday.
That'll air on Monday.
It'll air, yeah.
Yep. So I've just made that executive decision, Graham.
All right, that's fine. It gives me a day or two to prepare to talk about it. All right, we have a next question, and it's a two-parter. So this person's asking, how do you know if you succeeded in the interview? And then they provided some, this is from Felipe, some context, which is that they've interviewed with Ross. The interview asked a couple of times kind of follow-up questions, and what was the result of this? And they're wondering, is that like bad news?
No, I mean, people leave interviews and they think, well, they didn't ask me any behavioral questions, so obviously they're not interested in me, so I got nixed. Or they asked me this type of question, I don't get it, so maybe it wasn't a good interview. You can over sweat and over speculate, etc., but I don't think there's much signal value in any of that kind of stuff. And hopefully you perform well in the interview, and provide your best performance because you prepared really well. And the interviewer, I've provided a little bit of insight. The interviewer will write a report based off of the interview, and different schools
Yeah.
might have different type of reports that they write, and they'll probably provide some data points in terms of, you know, the feedback they're providing for that interview. But they're not the only decision maker in your final decision, right? So again, the interview report will go back to your file, and then the admissions committee or you know, individuals of the admissions committee will re-review your overall application with this additional data point, the interview report, to come up with the final decision. So again, some folks can have bad interviews and get admitted because their overall profile is just really, really strong, and the interview wasn't awful. It didn't raise a red flag. Maybe you just didn't perform particularly well that day or whatever it might be. Yeah, I wouldn't overthink it. Once you're done with the interview, there's nothing much else you can do, right? Send a follow-up email thanking them for the interview and so forth. That's certainly within bounds, but yeah, other than drive yourself nuts, there's not a whole lot else you can do.
Yeah. What about the thank you letter? Like, you know, does that provide a chance to, you know, kind of shape things at all? Or, you know, should we be sending thank you letters in this era of, I mean, is
Yeah,
that,
for sure.
yeah.
I mean, I think you send a follow-up and don't assume, but presume it'll end up in your file. So don't write something in there that will get you eliminated, because that will end up in your file. But be very polite, courteous, gracious. And if you think there was something you weren't able to communicate effectively, it might be an opportunity to share that. But I wouldn't go overboard with that, because you've already had the opportunity to share it in the interview. So it's kind of like, all right, now you sent me a 3-page essay. I'm not sure that's the way to handle the
Yeah.
thank you. So you could overcome a little bit, but I wouldn't get carried away with it.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is, and again, hard to know exactly from Felipe's kind of question as to how their interview went. I mean, it's really hard to judge based on
Yeah.
this, but I would say, you know, if you finding in this interview that there were these questions about, well, what were the results? What, you know, what was the
That's
purpose of this?
brilliant. Yeah.
Then, you know, it's probably a good sign. I would say, with that said, part of me was thinking maybe in your next interview, make sure that you're, you know, thinking about the sort of STAR method: situation, task, actions, results, so that when you are telling a story, you're making sure the results are clear. But I mean, hard to say from just this snippet as to what it all means. But I think, you know, that is always a good policy to make sure that you're kind of beginning with the end in mind. If you're sharing a story, like, what was the outcome? What did you learn? What did the company
Yeah.
gain, et cetera? Right.
I think that's really promising line of inquiry, because the interviewer is interested, right? And when they say, and what was the results for this, as long as the answer wasn't, well, we failed and we didn't learn anything
Yeah.
from it and we keep failing, then probably the
Yeah. No.
result could be quite a good sell point. Yeah.
Yeah. Felipe had one more follow-up, which is, you know, who
Yeah.
do we send the thank you to, the interviewer or the admissions team?
The interviewer. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would
Yeah.
say if you don't have the interviewer's email,
Yeah.
send it to the general and use the person's name, you know, indicate that it's for this person in the subject line, et cetera. But because I recognize not everyone walks away from the interview with the interviewer's personal email. In fact, some interviewers purposely just give out the generic one, you know, whether that's info at, you know, ross.edu or whatever. But you can send it either way, but just use the person's name in the correspondence.
Yeah.
We have some good questions that have come in from Owen. I'm going to put those up here. So Alex, take us through these.
Yeah. So I've had my TOC interview that went very well, and have Emory and Darden scheduled this week. Any advice for these two schools specifically? So is it right, Graham? It's Darden that doesn't look at your resume at all. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a totally blinded. I mean, the first question is to tell them about your background, so they kind of get it as an oral kind of, you know, resume review instead of them getting a piece of paper. Yeah, which is a little
I
different.
mean, other than that, I wouldn't think the interview prep strategy would be a whole lot different between TOC, Emory, and Darden. Each of them has probably a geographic component to it, that you need to make sure that you're obviously a good fit for the program. So, you know, being in wherever Darden is in the middle of Is it
Charlottesville.
Charlottesville?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Charlottesville.
and Tuck somewhere up in the woods somewhere, and Emory's in
Hanover.
the city of Atlanta.
Yeah.
So making sure that your why Tuck, why Emory, why Darden makes a lot of sense. That's really, really important for these types of schools because, again, they're all really, really strong MBA programs, but there's a whole, group of M7 programs that sit on top of them. So, if you're an outstanding candidate for them, they're wondering why. It makes sense for you to want to come to Atlanta for your MBA, for example. And even if you're not right at the top of the heap, it still makes a lot of sense to have that why my school, so Darden and Emory, really well developed. And you can make really strong cases for both of these programs. There's no doubt about that, especially if you're a consultant, you're targeting consulting and so forth, and that region. So I would say the prep work that you did for Tuck would get you a long way, but obviously make sure that you tailor it specifically now for these other two schools. But congratulations, that's 3 interview invites is very good.
Yeah, I would just add that I think there is something, like you say, there's a common thread across these three, which is that all three of these programs are relatively small and incredibly close knit, and there's a reason. I mean, I think that they go to extra effort to identify people that really want to be there. And that in turn enhances the kind of community and creates the culture that they're looking to create. So I think part of your focus in the interview needs to be, make sure you know a lot about the program in question, how you want to get involved. And as
Yeah,
Alex says, how is the program going to help you advance your career? But yeah, you need to show them that you're excited. And I think, as we said earlier, that may be less the case for, say, an HBS or a Stanford, where they're not even going to ask you necessarily like why you want to be there, or at least not in the same way that's going to be, so vital in these interviews. So I think all three of these schools have very special communities, and you need to convince them that you want to be part of that
yeah,
community.
yeah,
So definitely do
yeah,
your homework there, talk to students, alumni, whatever you can do as you prep.
yeah, yeah.
Now there was a follow-up here too, which I'll just put up here. Okay.
Yeah. I would just say good luck with Stern. So the question is, I'm still waiting to hear back from Stern for round one. Do you know when they send out a big chunk of these? Has it already happened? Nobody knows. I'm not even sure the Stern admissions office knows when they're going to send these things out. Year on year, they are, what's the polite way of saying this? They obviously have a process that makes a lot of sense to them, but it's quite uneven in terms of when they send out interview invites. I think that's quite a diplomatically correct thing. I'm a huge fan of Stern, and I think they've done some things really super well, but I don't think their interview invite process is one of their high points.
Yeah, for one reason or another, as Alex says, like year after year, sometimes you'll see people getting interview invitations very late, so late, in fact, that people in the next round have already heard something, right? So there's something going on where they just have their process. It can be quite drawn out. So, I mean, what I would say is, if you haven't been rejected, you have a chance to get an interview. I mean, right up until, I mean, it really is just a long kind of process. So I wouldn't worry. The fact that you have all these other interviews already
Yeah,
is actually a really positive sign. I would expect that you will hear from them at some point with an invitation.
yeah,
If you're getting invites at the likes of Darden and Tuck, one would think maybe you're in the ballpark for a Stern too. So yeah, it just takes them a while for some reason. I think maybe they have a smaller team of readers. I'm not sure what it is. They do get a lot of applications.
yeah,
They benefit quite a bit from their location. So that may be, part of it, right? It's like an outsized number of apps for a relatively small admissions team and a relatively small class. So, yeah, but hang in there. That's my main.
yeah.
Yeah. So just as a follow-up, Owen was kind enough to share that, they are drawn to Emory and Darden for those consulting placements, as you guessed, Alex, and,
Yeah.
that they know they have this kind of close culture. It sounds like that Owen applied with a test waiver in round one,
Yeah.
but is thinking of adding a test if they apply to schools in round two. So
I think that's really smart, Owen, and I'll tell you why. You may end up on the wait list. And I hate to say that, but some of these top schools, even if they allow for waivers, a number of folks that got waivers end up on the wait list. And one of the reasons is they don't have a test score. So if that is the case, you're taking the test for round two. If you come back with a good GRE score, I would get it into these schools as soon as you think, despite the fact that you requested a waiver. So I think that's a smart strategy on your part to do the GRE, and hopefully you've got a round two strategy in place also. So you're also applying to some additional schools and so forth, because it does seem like the rest of your profile must be pretty strong to get all these interview invites with a test waiver.
Yeah, I agree. We got another question from Muhammad, which is round two too late to get a significant scholarship? This is a great question. Thanks, Muhammad, for asking this. What's your take, Alex?
No, I mean, round one, round two could be a little bit tougher if you're potentially overrepresented, but certainly not necessarily just for pure consideration for scholarship. And schools know year on year how many applications they generally get for round one, for round two, and so on and so forth. If we're talking round three, or the final round, depending on what school you're targeting, then yes, they're using that final round just to fill little holes, to round out the class, to make sure the class has real good diversity and so on and so forth. But the first couple of rounds, they basically using to get that 80-90% of the class seats filled. And certainly round two, there's going to be plenty of scholarship money still available for candidates.
Yeah, there's plenty of money, and schools actually, as Alex says, they earmark, they know they need to save funds, and it's not, I would not worry about that at all. The only thing we worry about with round one, round two is if you're really overrepresented. And the other thing I have heard, just speaking of application volume, Alex, I've heard some rumblings from schools that I've been talking to that maybe because this H-1B news kind of hit, they're thinking that there could be an increase in application volume in the second round. Now that people know that you don't need to pay the fee for an H-1B visa if you're an international candidate. So they're wondering if there might be a bump up in volume from internationals in round two. But we shall see. Just some follow-ups from Owen. Owen mentioned that, they didn't have time to do the GRE in the first round, but that they're going to do it in December. And they're wondering, if we have any advice for widening their application, and I'll just put this up on screen. So they wonder, like, where else should they be looking? And they mentioned in a subsequent comment that they've only applied to Darden, Tuck, Emory, and Stern so far, which are the schools we talked about. So they're wondering, I know what you're going to say to this.
What am I going to say?
Oh, I thought you were going to say, well, it depends on what you hear back to some extent.
Well, there is that, obviously. But let's break it down, though, because it's quite an interesting question. I know we've only got 4 minutes left, so.
Before you do that, I should just mention the next one of these, our next live stream, which we're doing, we try to do them every month, is going to be on, I looked it up, on the 25th of November, which is the fourth Tuesday in November. Should be, everyone should still be around because you won't be leaving for Thanksgiving until Wednesday or Thursday. But anyway, that's when we'll do it, just so people know. But yeah, go ahead.
So
Sorry, talk about Owen.
Yeah, I'll just address Maxwell's question real quick because we've already talked about this. So just, obviously Maxwell might not have been here. Can you confirm if the H-1B visa do not need to pay 100,000 for international students? How does this? That's correct as our current understanding of the situation, right? So the 100 grand is for folks that are applying for the H-1B visa from overseas as an international student that then goes on to practical training. If you're applying within the US for the H-1B, you're not liable for that 100,000. That's the current understanding, etc. But back to Owen. Currently, I've applied to Darden, Tuck, Emory, and Stern. So Tuck's a top 10 program in that sort of 8 to 10. I've already mentioned that. Darden and Stern would be in the next tier, and then Emory would be in the following tier. That's basically how I would think of these programs. So for round two strategy, I might pick, again, depending on outcomes, as Graham said, but that's going to be muddied a little bit by this GRE waiver situation. So with an above average GRE score, let's say, I would come back probably in round two with another of those top 10. So that could be, so Haas and and Yale would sort of fit into that. I'd probably have a couple of other top 16. So it could be Duke, it could be could be Ross and so forth, and then another top 20 to sort of keep it consistent, which could be let's say Tepper. Would
Mhm.
be similar to Emory in terms of competitiveness and so forth. And obviously, I would have I would go a bit deeper on making sure they got good consulting placements and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I would also add to that that some of this could depend, Owen, on where you want to be
Yeah,
geographically post MBA. That does play a role, even at the top schools. Like there is a
yeah,
definite pull. Or
yeah,
so, because and I would also say if the GRE goes well and you're getting
yeah.
positive responses
Open
from all of these,
M7. Yeah,
I would apply to Kellogg or
yeah,
Chicago or even
yeah,
Wharton. Any
yeah, yeah.
school that has strong consulting placements, that's a top school. So, yeah, a couple others, Alex. If you want to try to just nail with a few more questions that we've had here.
I've got to be
One
in the
is
pub in 15 minutes.
all right, yeah. All right, so, you're gonna walk to the pub. Any
Yeah,
advice someone's on the wait list at Darden already this year?
yeah. I mean, again, it would be really think long and hard about why you might be on the wait list, right? So if it's a test waiver situation, I go and take the test. That would be the first thing I would ask if you waive the
Mhm.
test. But there are potentially other aspects of your profile that you might be able to improve. Um, Or it might be that you didn't do a good job of the why Darden, and they're querying that a little bit. So making sure your commitment to Darden comes across well. The point
Yeah,
is, with these wait lists, one, you've got to acknowledge that you want to be on the wait list, and two, your behavior on the wait list signals to the school how much you really want to be at that school. So that's really important. If you go silent when you're put on a wait list, that's a really strong signal for the school to let you go. So
yeah,
they will rely on some folks being silent because they got admitted to an M7 program or something like that. So they don't need to have admitted that person, and that would hurt their yield. So wait list, a lot of schools will use the wait list. They do not want to admit anyone off the wait list that they can't yield. That's really important to them. So bear
yeah.
that in mind. Um,
Yeah,
Graham?
I would just add, yeah, it's all about self-assessment. Figure out, like, why are you on that list? Is it that you
Yeah,
didn't convince them of Darden? Is it that you don't have a test or a low test? Is there something you can do to address any
yeah,
of it and follow the rules, whatever the
yeah.
waitlist rules are? Because
And
in some
and
cases, yeah,
Yeah, and just to say, round one waitlist is not the be all and end all. If you're round three and you're put on the waitlist, that's really a bit of a waste of time. But
yeah,
round one, the admit rates for waitlists in round one is going to be higher than any other stage of the waitlist or early action or whenever you applied to Darden. So being on the
yeah.
waitlist now, do all the right things to optimize your opportunity. Yeah,
Yeah. So we did get one last question from Maxwell
yeah,
about kind of sharing sort of the background and wondering if they could apply to top schools in round two.
yeah,
Maxwell did also share the fact that he has already has an interview slot with Darden and Owen Vanderbilt
yeah.
through ATM, which I'm not sure what ATM stands for. It's probably a program. What could that be? Oh, anyway. Yeah,
So
I
at
mean,
the moment, come on, Graham, you got to
oh.
think how
Oh,
these young people.
though at the moment. Okay, so has
Yeah,
interviews with Darden and Owen, 330 out of 340 on
yeah,
sorry, Maxwell. They didn't have acronyms when I was younger. I'm just,
yeah, yeah,
no, but what do you I mean, that's a great test score,
yeah,
Alex, right? I
yeah.
mean, but,
I mean,
you
again,
could
I wouldn't worry about the fact that you're applying in round two necessarily. Now, yeah, perhaps you're from Nigeria. I think Nigeria might be the one country on the continent that might be considered slightly overrepresented in the pool.
yeah,
But you've got a good GRE score. You've got
very
some
good.
strong leadership. Apply.
Yeah, working at a
Give
Big
it your
4.
best shot.
Yeah.
The worst case scenario is you don't get admitted, but if you don't apply, you will not know, right? So yeah,
Ghana is so Maxwell's indicated that he's in
Guyana.
Ghana,
Yeah,
which is probably the second biggest
yeah, yeah,
from Africa if we're talking about, Nigeria and Ghana both being fairly well represented. But still, I think round two, hopefully your GPA in undergrad was solid.
yeah.
Good leadership from a known entity in a Big 4 firm, terrific test score. I mean, yeah, go for it. Absolutely. And I think applying round two, and they did there was also a question from Owen about whether we're going to do one of these in December after decisions come out. And the answer is yes. I mean, we're going to do one a month, fourth Tuesday of the month, unless that happens to be Christmas Day or something. We'll keep everyone posted. But as of
it is
now, the next
Christmas
one is,
Day, so
is it? So we'll do it
we
on
might shift that one.
I might do it the week before or something, but
Yeah.
we'll let everyone know at minimum at the next session, which we said is November 25th, I think is what I said earlier. The fourth Tuesday in November. It's been really great. Obviously, we're kind of out of time today, but I do appreciate all these questions. Owen, Maxwell, Mohammed, Jasleen, Claire. There was somebody else too, maybe. Oh, Felipe, Andrea. Everyone, great questions today as usual. And we'll come back and hang out next month. These are a lot of fun, Alex, and I know I enjoy them. I'm not going to speak for you, Alex. Maybe we're preventing you from getting to the pub.
No, it's absolutely brilliant. And, seems like really high profile candidates, right? All getting interview invites and so on and so forth at these top programs. So, so
that's because they read Clear Admit. They read
Yeah.
Clear Admit content, so they know what's up.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see everyone in 1 month's time. Obviously, in the meantime, you can hear Alex and I weekly on our Monday podcast that airs every Monday. There are 400 and some episodes if you miss us and want to go back and listen to back episodes. And obviously, over on clearadmit.com, you can follow Livewire. You can use our chat bot to get your questions answered. It's a Gen AI bot that we built that is absolutely incredible. Make use of all these free resources in the interim as you wait for the next live stream.
Yeah. Best of luck, everyone. Take care. Thanks a lot, Graham. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, Alex. We'll see you soon.
Yeah.